Hello and welcome. My name is Stacy Bersani, Program Manager for IEEE-HKN. IEEE is the world's largest technical professional organization dedicated to advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. We thank you all for joining us for our 2021 Pathways to Industry program. Before we begin, please note a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, your engagement tools for your use. All tools are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to make the most out of your space. Note that we recommend using a wired internet connection to access today's presentation. Please close any programs or browser sessions running in the background that could cause issues. There is no dial-in number for this event. Please make sure your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is up so that you can hear our presenters. You can find additional answers to some technical issues by clicking the orange question mark or help icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions for today's presenters, you can submit them through the Q&A widget on your screen or click the purple Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. We will answer as many questions as time allows. If you click the green resources icon at the bottom of your screen, you'll find more information about upcoming events, including the interactive networking sessions being held this week. Finally, the on-demand link for today's event will be emailed to all registrants. Our virtual event today is What They Didn't Teach You in Engineering School. During this session, two young professionals will discuss the transition from the classroom to industry, work-life balance, and how to get your career off to the right start. If you would like to post on Facebook about this event, please use the hashtag IAMHKN. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to IEEE-HKN Director Nancy Osten.
Well, thank you so much, Stacy, and hello and welcome to everyone to day 2 of our Pathways to Industry event. We're real excited. We had a great day 1, and those sessions will be available on demand, so if you want to go back and check those out, please do. But today we have a really popular session. We've done this each year in the Pathways program called What They Didn't Teach You in Engineering School. It's really great insights from young professionals, young working engineers, for the things that they wish they had learned or they didn't get around to teaching you, the things they didn't tell you that you really needed to know when you went from the classroom into corporations. So we have 2 great young professionals with us today. Both are HKN members, Amy Jones, who's a Gamma Theta member at Missouri S&T, just like me, and Rebecca Cohen, who is a Beta Alpha from Drexel University. I knew both of them when they were both student leaders, and Rebecca when she was president of her chapter. And I'm really delighted that they joined us today to share their lessons learned, the things that they learned and wish they had known when they were students and when they were trying to make that transition. What are those opportunities and options and those perks and pitfalls that you wish you'd learned but need to know as you enter industry? So I think we're going to start off today with Amy or with Rebecca.
I can start, Nancy, if you can hear me.
Great. Well, hey, Amy, welcome. Amy, you can introduce yourself and your position at John Deere and let everyone know a little about yourself. And thanks so much. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. So good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here. As Nancy mentioned, I am originally from Missouri. So I was born and raised in the St. Louis area. I did my undergraduate degree in electrical engineering at Missouri S&T, formerly the University of Missouri-Rolla, and I did my master's degree while working at Purdue. Most recently, I finished up a certificate in systems design and management through MIT. I started out my career in construction management, so doing a lot of project management work for large-scale industrial and commercial projects, things like airports and power plants. And then ended up returning to John Deere, where I'd done some internships in college. So you can see me on a skid steer loader. In my time at John Deere, I've been really fortunate to focus mostly on a single product line. So I've done software testing, systems engineering, and I've been the supervisor of the electrical and systems team for the Deere excavator product line, which you can see in the lower right-hand corner. Those machines are pretty unique in John Deere. They're manufactured in our factory in Tianjin, China, which is a couple hours east of Beijing, right on the eastern seaboard of China. And as part of that team, it's a true global team with lots of colleagues in India and China. And I feel so fortunate to have had those experiences early in my career, learning about how people develop best-in-class machines from all over the world. It's also been an interesting thing for me. I never thought growing up that I would be a world traveler, but that top photo is me on the Great Wall of China, which is way higher than they tell you. So there was a little bit of my fear of heights in that photo. I've been an IEEE Eta Kappa new member since 2006. Recently became a senior member of IEEE. In my spare time, I really enjoy being an advocate for STEM outreach, particularly trying to get young women and girls interested in science and engineering as a career. I do have 2 kids. My daughter is 5 and my son is 1.5. And then some of the extracurricular stuff that I've done, I'm also a pretty passionate innovator. I have 2 patents currently with 11 applications pending. And I've been honored to receive some recognition from SAE and AEM, as well as IEEE USA. Unfortunately, I'm no longer a new face of engineering. I'm now an old face of engineering. But I'm really excited to talk to you guys today and to share a little bit about what I've learned over the first decade or so of my career.
Okay, and now I'm going to ask Rebecca to talk a little bit about herself, and here is her introductory slide.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Rebecca Cohen. I'm a senior systems engineer at Lockheed Martin, working out of their King of Prussia, Pennsylvania location, but doing it remotely from Maryland. So I grew up in New Jersey. I attended an engineering high school in Union County. Oh, wait. Sorry. From there, I went to Drexel University, and I studied toward a BS in computer engineering and electrical engineering, which were different majors, but through the same department. I was president of the HKN Beta Alpha chapter from 2016 to 2017, and I did 3 co-ops in school. So I did my first 6-month co-op with SiriusXM radio, doing some FPGA and microcontroller, like Arduino type development. And then I did my next 2 co-ops, both with the same group at Lockheed Martin, doing some research and development type work, kind of in the same vein, but definitely more kind of field testing and sort of just, I guess, more mature development work. So I had a lot of freedom at my first internship to play around and just learn. And kind of as I progressed in my internships, I took on a little bit more responsibility in terms of engineering. So I am currently in the process of finishing up my master's. My last class was on Monday. So I'll have a master's in cybersecurity in a couple of months. And I've been with Lockheed Martin at this point for almost 7 years. You can see in the bottom right, there's a picture of me with my Engineering Leadership Development Program team, wearing our Best Team Spirit Award. I did rotations through that program in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, working on a variety of research and development programs and sort of larger defense contracts, more traditional defense work, as they call it. And that's it for me. Oh, and actually there's me at the top, kind of in the middle of nowhere, doing a field test for work. And then me with my now husband at graduation, wearing my HKN stole and cords.
That's great. Amy, would you like to return to your timeline slide and talk a little bit about how you came to where you are right now?
Sure, I can certainly do that.
Okay.
So I have, oh, perfect. So I have what I would think is a pretty standard timeline, especially for people who graduated in roughly my area of the area and time. So I graduated in 2008 with my bachelor's. I got my first job, did that for 18 months, and then 2009 was a really bad time to be in construction, so I had the experience of being laid off, which is not something that I ever thought would happen. So once that happened, I was very fortunate to have a quick turnaround and return to John Deere. I spent about a year in an engineering development program for them and ended up moving into a role in software testing. I took my first trip overseas, which was to China in 2012. So for somebody who hadn't done any traveling whatsoever outside the country before that, that was a big eye-opener for me. In 2014, I finished up my master's degree and moved into a systems role. At John Deere, systems engineering tends to be a little bit focused on the software side. In excavators, my role was really to be kind of the electrical key contact on that entire product line. So if it had a wire or a signal, it was my job to make sure that it worked right. In 2015, I had my first kid, which was a little bit of a road bump for me. It took a while to figure out how to balance being a mom and also being an engineer. In 2016, one of the first major projects that I'd ever worked on from the design side went into production. That was one of the things that I look back on as one of the most major achievements in my career so far, and I was particularly proud of that. Continued doing a lot of new product development, a lot of continuous improvement support, finished up my systems certificate in the 2018 timeframe, had another baby in 2019, and then in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, my company also went through a pretty major reorganization. And so as part of that, I accepted a promotion into this operator station role where I am today. So overall, my career has been categorized by some pretty steady progression that's been interrupted by some pretty significant life events, whether it's being laid off or reorganizations or having kids. One of the things that I've had to spend a lot of time doing is figuring out how to be flexible, which is something that I think that engineering school tries to instill in us through a lot of group projects. I don't know how successfully we end up doing that, but it's certainly been a skill that's been advantageous to me.
That's fantastic. And Rebecca, let's go through your timeline as well.
Sure. So the top of the timeline is my kind of academic timeline, and the bottom is my professional timeline. So 2012, I started at Drexel. 2013, so right after my freshman year, I went straight into my first 6-month internship, which was the one with SiriusXM. Shortly after that internship, I added an electrical engineering double major to my computer engineering double major because I realized there was this whole side of engineering that I wanted to know more about. Then I continued on to do my 2 internships with Lockheed Martin. Luckily, I was actually able to stay on part-time in between and kind of continue that into graduation. So I graduated, and shortly after, I was admitted into the ELDP program, where I did my first rotation kind of as a continuation of my co-ops, which, you know, good and bad. It kind of felt like nothing had changed, and I felt like I should have all of this responsibility now. And I wasn't really sure where it all went. So that I thought was a good opportunity to kind of ease into it. And then in 2018, I did a second rotation. So I moved from kind of research and development work into a small program, but still a more structured environment where if you wanted to buy something, you couldn't just tell someone, hey, I need this. Can you get it on Amazon for me? And it had to go up the chain and then back down the chain. So definitely a very different work experience, even though it was, you know, across the river and same company. In 2018, I started a master's in cybersecurity, which, you know, just finishing up now. And in 2019, I moved to Maryland to work on a large program, which completely different experience again. All of a sudden, I didn't know who half the people I was working with were. And when something went wrong, I was just like, but I didn't even know that was something that was on this program. How did we mess that up? We're not even doing that. So it's definitely 3 totally different experiences in 3 years. And then in 2020, so last year, I graduated from the ELDP program into a permanent position. So, you know, a 2-year at least role, working as a SEAT lead, which is an acronym for Systems Engineering, Integration, and Test on a small program, which is something I learned along the way. Is I really like small programs where I can kind of put my hands in everything, and I know who everyone is and what they're working on, and kind of bringing that back together. And that's what I'm still working on for the foreseeable future. So that's my timeline.
So this is great information for both of your timelines, Rebecca and Amy. Really interesting. So I really, what I've heard in both of them, both of your conversations, is the disruptions that you encountered along the way. Particularly, Amy, you had some real disruption. So, you think your career is going to go in a path and kind of linear, and then you have to deal with these disruptions. And Rebecca, working with different teams, and how that really affected your your progression and your career and things like that. So maybe you want to just talk a little bit about what you learned by like those disruptions, and how you prepare for that. Because again, I think when we're in school, it goes along. You start in kindergarten and you go right through college and maybe even beyond. But then what then? When the future isn't as clear and you're not really sure. Maybe you can talk a little bit about those kinds of lessons that you learned around the way and how you cope with those things.
Sure. So probably the biggest lesson learned out of my experiences, including a layoff and some of those types of things. When you're given a problem in engineering school, and I ask you how to solve it, the first thing that you're going to tell me is like, well, first I'm going to look at all the information, and then I'm going to make an idea of what that solution should look like. And then I'm going to draft some steps using, my math and science tools in order to get there. And then I'm going to iterate, that product development cycle. What I learned through those disruptions is that those are not the first step. The first step, if you are given any problem, is to pause. It's to pause and to take a deep breath and to remember that you know more than you think that you do. So in a situation where, I was laid off, I was the one bringing in most of the money for my family. My husband and I had been married less than a year. That pause, that breath, that chance to reevaluate really kept me from jumping into another situation where I might not have been as happy. And instead, having that breath to pause gave me a chance to reevaluate what I was looking for in a company, and to leverage some connections and get into a situation where I'm obviously happy. I'm still here 10 years later. So that was a big lesson out of disruption for me. What about you, Rebecca? What do you think?
Yeah, so I was pretty fortunate in that all of my disruptions I kind of brought upon myself. So I actually found that, in college, there are discrete beginnings and ends to everything, where you start a class and this is my final, and at that time, I don't have to do this anymore, and all the work that I did is in the past. And I mean, sure, you might reference your notes in the next class, but really, other than maybe senior design, there was no building upon that, and there was no planning for what happens, when you leave that role. Like, you stop that class and then the next year someone else will take it, and there's no real transition. And something that I kind of learned along the way is, especially early in your career, you're not going to be the last one doing that job. There will always be someone after you. And if you want to kind of have the flexibility to adapt to these disruptions and take on new roles and new responsibilities, you kind of have to have that in the back of your mind to start and think, if I want to hand this off to someone and I want to be able to do it within, 3 months of something new coming along, I should really make sure that I have notes on this and I know who my contacts are and kind of plan in advance. And that way you're kind of prepared when they throw it at you and they say, hey, by the way, we're starting up this proposal and it'd be great to have you on it. It's a great growth opportunity. It's good to be prepared and, know that you can take that on without everything that you were working on just kind of falling behind and falling into the cracks.
Yeah, they're really kind of different experiences, right? Because, again, you said, before, and you had a professor or maybe an advisor that helped shepherd you along, and you knew what the next steps were going to be because you knew the classes you had to take and things like that. So, a couple of things about that. About mentors and again, also maybe how you find a mentor in the workplace and, to kind of replace that sort of experience that you might have had in college. So how important is that then? Do either of you have mentors, or have you accomplished that, or how do you do that within your company? I know maybe through those development programs or otherwise.
Do you want to take that one first, Rebecca?
Sure, I can start. So I'll be honest, I don't know that I have, very many formal mentor relationships. And that's because I have found that despite the stigma, a lot of engineers are actually very good to talk to and will definitely be pretty open about their experiences so far. So every position that I've worked in, I've been able to kind of, talk to my manager, but also talk to the other engineers who are maybe, 3 years ahead of me, or even 10, 15 years ahead of me, to see kind of how they took their path. And like Nancy said, there's no, discrete, you're a systems engineer and you're going to do systems engineering for the rest of your life and it's going to look like this. So it's definitely nice to have that kind of breadth of kind of mentors, but also just, confidants and people who you can say, hey, there's this opportunity and I don't know if it's a good one for me. Like, is this going to take me where I want to go, or is this going to take me in another direction? So Amy, you probably have your own experiences with this. I'll hand it over to you as well.
Yeah, I think your point about most engineers being good to talk to and willing to help is actually really true in my experience as well. I think we're miles away from the old stereotype of an engineer as someone who sits at a desk and kind of grunts when you try and talk to them. At least I hope we are. For me, mentors have been incredibly valuable, and they've taken many forms. They may not have called themselves mentors. They may have been people who coached me through a specific issue. They may have been people who advocated for me on a leadership level. They may have been people who challenged me to push myself. So they've certainly taken a lot of forms, but finding those people who are anywhere from, just a year beyond you to many years beyond you in your career and learning what you can from them. I think that's one of the things that you can really leverage from your engineering degree is, that ability to be a constant learner, and hopefully a constant learner no matter what form that education comes in, whether it's formal classroom education or from individuals. The mentor that I always think of most fondly is the guy who I wanted him to mentor me. I did not know how to ask him. And so I kept like, hey, would you just review my goals for me and give me your feedback? And in my goal, I put in like, get a mentor. And he finally looked at me and he said, Amy, do you want me to mentor you? And I was like, yes, I do. So as a person who has people that I am mentoring, I would say never be embarrassed to ask someone to be a mentor, because there are people who I have wanted to extend an offer of mentorship to. But, it's also a little nerve-wracking to put yourself out there and ask to be a mentor. So if you think there's a value there in that relationship, please don't hesitate to ask for it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think, we learn a lot of that in Ed at Kappa Nu, and I know at Lockheed there's a lot of Ed at Kappa Nu members. I've been able to introduce you to some, Rebecca, so I think that's great to connect maybe with other Ed at Kappa Nu people when you're in the workforce. And same, Amy, I know I've connected some other Deere people have gone from Ed at Kappa Nu to John Deere together. So I think looking for those people that you might have a natural relationship with kind of works as well. But it's great to figure, to help figure those things out with other people. It's great advice. So, Rebecca, you're just finishing up a master's degree, and I think, Amy, you've got. So how important is that, seeking further education once you're in your career, and how did you make those decisions, and what do you think it's going to lead you to?
So for me, a master's degree started out as a personal goal of mine to get deeper into a subject. I really enjoyed academia, and it was something that I wasn't ready to give up when I started full-time work. As I've moved forward in my career, I've considered MBAs or additional master's degree. And for me, I think the value really comes from the application to the specific work that you're doing. So if you are interested in a master's degree and you want to do it because it's a passion project, absolutely, that's enough reason to do it. If you think that just having a master's degree on your resume is going to get you places, there are some businesses where it's true. There are some businesses where it's not. And in my specific industry, I'd say unless you're taking that master's degree and applying it, it's a limited value. So I'm glad I did mine. I'm also very glad I'm done with mine. So Rebecca, you have my sincere congratulations for finishing. But it was a personal goal, and I'm very pleased that I achieved it.
Yeah, I think kind of building on that, in my experience, there is a checkbox for masters sometimes, and I know you'll see it kind of on a job requisition form. It'll say like, you should have 5 years of experience or 2 years plus a master's. And sure, that could be a reason to get a master's, but by the time you get a master's, you're going to be 5 years into your work experience anyway. So it's kind of, it might not be as helpful as if, you know, you can check that checkbox doing a BSMS and just, it's all done and, you know, it didn't make a difference either way. But I'll be honest, it's difficult doing a master's part-time while working. But I'm really glad I did wait to figure out what I wanted to get a master's in. And there's a very distinct difference, at least in my experience, between getting an undergraduate degree and a master's in terms of the way they structure the classes. Because my master's courses were a lot more kind of surveys of what exists right now and directly applicable to my job. So I did my master's in cybersecurity, and we had a lot of courses on how to use cybersecurity software and what that means and what are the evolving and emerging threats, and kind of just bringing you into the future a little bit more than I found in engineering school, where it was a lot of, this is the foundation of knowledge and your master's is your extension of that knowledge going forward. So definitely agree with Amy. I think it can definitely help you in your work life, having that extra education. But also, there's nothing wrong with, I don't do cybersecurity on a daily basis at work, but I have seen terms come up and ideas float about where I'm like, yes, I know what that means, and I could help kind of bring that into this program if needed. So I think there are many reasons to do a master's, and there's no wrong thing to do it in, whether you want to do it in more of a managerial sense or if you want to do it in more of a technical sense. But I do think there are a lot of benefits to having a master's in engineering.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's interesting. Cybersecurity really is not a discipline of its own, just like electrical engineering. It is intricate in everything that you must do as an engineer. So I don't think that you know, it's like a separate thing. You know, you're not just going to go do cyber. Perhaps you're going to have to integrate that security. I mean, we hear about it all the time. So really interesting. How do you balance kind of a specialization with pigeonholing? I mean, you know, you don't want to be, you know, focused into only one thing and have other opportunities. How have you kind of dealt with that? Are people thinking of you one way, but you sort of want to be thought of in maybe a broader sense or have other opportunities available to you?
Yeah, I can take that from a kind of, you know, first couple years out of school perspective and then pass it over to Amy. But in your first few years out of school, I mean, I'm almost 5 years out of school now. Does that seem right? Yeah. So, so
it goes fast.
It does. It goes really fast. So there really isn't much pigeonholing in that time period, just because your employer expects you to be fresh out of school, kind of meldable, and you can become whatever it is that you find interesting and you're productive at. So in my experience, I was able to kind of take on a role and, you know, have a job description, but there was no issue with kind of going over to the cubicle next to me and being like, so what are you working on today? And especially within a company, I mean, if things are proprietary, they're proprietary within the company. So usually there's no harm at all in kind of asking other people, what are you doing? What do you work on? How did you get there? So, I mean, that also fits into kind of the mentorship aspect of it, where, you know, you don't have to only have, you know, formal mentorship experiences. You can also just kind of ask people, you know, how did you get where you are? And a lot of times they'll let managers and other kind of higher program roles will have kind of flow down busy work. So I have become a master of Microsoft Project and putting schedules into Microsoft Project. And doing that, I learned, oh, this is what comes first when you do a project. And then, oh, in year 3, they're going to be doing this. That's kind of cool. I want to know more about that. And there are a lot of ways to get exposure to kind of what's going on around you. That's different from school, where everything is kind of segmented and, you know, this lab does research in this topic, and if you want to do something else, go to the other lab. It's very much everyone kind of works on a span of things, and you can kind of get your foot into any of them if you know who to talk to.
So that's such a great point about being continually curious and letting that be a characteristic of yours. I think that's the best guard against pigeonholing that you can do. Looking at it from my perspective now, I'm more of a manager now. I have a team that I work with. And so when I have people who are looking at wanting to diversify themselves, or if they've been in a particular role for a while and they want to branch out, one of the things that I first coach them to do is you have to not be afraid to be bad at stuff. One of the things about specialization is that you get really good at a job and you're going to do that job. And that's really addictive, I think, especially for engineers. I think that all of us as engineers, somebody asked us a question, we got it right, and we're just chasing that high for the rest of our careers. We want to be right and have the answers. And that's part of why we pick the fields we do. But if you want to avoid being pigeonholed, you have to be okay with being wrong sometimes. And you have to be okay with people looking at you and seeing, not seeing an expert. So one of my ground rules for that is, put yourself out there, volunteer to be on a project that isn't something that you're good at. And in fact, is something that you are deliberately bad at just to get practice at being bad at things. Other opportunities is, when you do start a new job, give yourself 6 months to be bad at it, to ask all of the stupid questions that you can think of. There's going to be acronyms that you're not going to know. Learning new things is a skill, like anything else. And the problem with specializing is that you get to a point where you know the answers. And so you really have to practice not knowing those answers. And so putting yourselves in situations where you can do that. Organizations like IEEE and Eta Kappa Nu are fantastic for this, by the way, because they can really function as safe spaces to put yourself out there. I would never be doing presentations to this many people in the normal course of my job. And so this is an opportunity for me to try and to be bad at it sometimes. Same thing with if you want to learn communications, if you want to learn about a different area of the industry, really look at opportunities outside of your main employer to really leverage that and bring it back.
I think that's really a great point, Amy. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. And someone had asked a question about particularly how I know your leadership roles at Eta Kappa Nu and working with IEEE and what you learned by running your chapter and experience in your chapter. How did that help you? I mean, can you relate? Because, again, I talk to people all the time about this is great preparation, a great place to maybe learn and fail and not do a great job but get better at it before you have to do it in your career or maybe doing meetings, planning programs, all the things that our Eta Kappa Nu leaders are doing out there today and our chapter members are working on. How did that prepare you for industry and for your careers?
So part of my history, so I was a homeschooled student. I started homeschooling in like 5th grade and was homeschooled all the way up through high school. And so for me, one of the things that Eta Kappa Nu gave me was an opportunity to connect with people, both from my peers and then in the industry. I didn't have high school career fairs. I didn't have a lot of those things that you use to kind of build those skills. And so it was particularly helpful for me to kind of learn that level of professional communication. Everything from, here's how you properly shake somebody's hand to here's, if you want to do a student conference, here's how you take that proposal to, your chapter advisor and get feedback on it. Here's how you take that feedback graciously and incorporate it in a professional way. And so I think a lot of those things as a student really became foundational for me in my first couple of jobs. Rebecca, I think you were a president a lot longer than I was. I only did it for about a semester, but I think you did several years, right?
Yeah, so I was president my senior year, but I had other leadership roles leading up to that. And I think a lot of what I learned through my leadership roles or performing the leadership roles in Eta Kappa Nu are kind of just good communication styles. So luckily I learned while I was in college, if you send someone an email 3 weeks in advance, they are not going to show up to your event 3 weeks later. They're not going to remember that it happened. So that's something that really kind of carries with you as well into the workplace, where you have to learn kind of when to check in and kind of when to take a step back, not to hound people, but also to make sure, if you sent them an email 3 weeks ago and you've heard nothing, maybe you should stop by their desk or give them a call, see what's going on. Because you have to make sure that anything that's important that needs to be prioritized, you have to understand, number one, it's not necessarily their priority. So if I'm president of Eta Kappa Nu, I want my event to be successful, but no one else wants to show up to my event unless I make it worth their time as well. So whether that means bringing pizza or if it means, offering an opportunity to network, offering something that's interesting to them. And it's the same, but different in a professional environment where, this program is my priority, but I have to explain why it's important to you that you should be helping me as well. Especially if this is someone who's very busy and only has a 30-minute slot to talk to me today. I guess that also came with the, opportunity to speak to professors in a way that you didn't necessarily as like a, typical engineering student when you were in Eta Kappa Nu. You could kind of, network with professors in a more friendly way and kind of build those relationships with people who, are definitely your senior, but that's kind of an important thing to carry with you into a work environment where you're not going to be working only with 20-somethings when you first start. You're going to have kind of friendly exposure to people who are much more senior than you, working much longer than you, who you don't want to be afraid of because you're, trying to please them by doing well on their program, but also you want to make a name for yourself and show that, you're doing good work.
Yeah, that managing up. That is probably the term we use in industry, but how do you manage up? And you do that when you have to go and work with your department chair, you have to go work with your faculty and others. I think that's a really great point of how that teaches you. And again, it's a great place to learn things and kind of cut your teeth on those sort of skill sets and budgeting and putting things together and reporting out. Because I guess you mentioned, Amy, or Rebecca, project management. I mean, project management is so required, and I think when you're managing, your Eta Kappa Nu chapter or maybe your programs you're putting together, you're learning those project management skills. That's probably, it was interesting to mention that, and I think that's a great thing to point out is how do you manage in that direction? I think you made some really good points there. Anything else that you would have learned or want to share about with our students today about what they can be doing now to prepare themselves for that when they get into the workplace?
So I can start there. Probably the big principle behind some of those types of skills, you'll hear them called soft skills. Soft skills are not so soft. Things like communication, building relationships, making those connections, those are really key and they're really advantageous to you, and especially the first part of your career. So coming up with opportunities to practice those and to get good at those is a fantastic way to distinguish yourself. When I hire now, I will 100% take someone who is good at communication over someone who is a 4.0, absolutely genius, who can't communicate with anybody. And that all comes down to, you can be the best engineer in the world, but if you cannot tell someone about your fantastic, brilliant idea, or if you can't describe a problem or a solution to someone who's on the other side of the world, then your utility to my team is really pretty limited. So for me, going to networking events, getting good at making kind of general small talk, even if it's a little formulaic, was really helpful. Taking opportunities to do presentations. If it's, if you're in IEEE and you're a student, can you introduce the speaker at your next event? Can you maybe moderate a panel, much like Nancy is doing for us? Can you offer to, I don't know, serve the burgers at the barbecue, things like that. Anything that gets you in front of people and in some kind of minor leadership role is a good opportunity to practice kind of your executive presence and how to not just talk like a leader, but how to seem like a leader and how to inhabit the persona of a leader. Those were particularly valuable for me. What about you, Rebecca? What have you done to get ready to be a leader?
So I guess this isn't something that I did. It's something that I guess I wish I did. Nancy mentioned reporting and writing weekly, this is what the team did this week emails, and monthly, here's a rundown of all the really important things that you need to know, is something that you kind of grow into pretty quickly in engineering. And there's no real lessons in, here's how to extract only the things that your manager cares about and put that into a PowerPoint slide class. And I think that's something that the earlier you can start thinking that way. So, there's some courses where I had a requirement to fill out a lab notebook. And, I had to write down what the measurements were and what my conclusions were. But my conclusions, I don't think ever included, and this is why it matters in real life. Or, and this is what I got out of doing it. And I think there's benefit to kind of thinking about everything that you're doing that way, and especially in school in terms of, and because I learned this, I can now apply it here. And a lot of times you'll hear things in the office like, oh, our team is doing this or that or the other thing. And, a light bulb might go off and you're like, why aren't we doing that? Or we could feed into that. We can help you do that. We just need to make that connection. And I think thinking about kind of the greater impacts now of even your coursework will help you when you get into industry kind of make those connections of, this and that, they're really not that different. And here's how we could bring them together.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, actually, especially as presidents or leadership at IEEE-HKN, you learn to lead other volunteers. And in your roles now, you might be leading teams or employees or mentoring. So I think those skills about leading volunteers, people that are unpaid to do the work, is a very specific skill. And I think maybe that also uniquely prepares you to go and be a manager or to work on those kinds of teams, because you have to find ways to motivate people. So a little bit about, how to motivate others. Maybe you can get some insights on that and what you might have learned in IEEE-HKN and how you're applying that today in your jobs.
So I guess I can start on this one. Number one, it's always helpful if they can get paid for it. So a lot of people are more than happy to help if you, at least, where I work, if you give them a charge code. So if you say, yeah, you can help me, and, you can put your 2 hours that you're helping me on this charge code, very helpful. If not, if it's something interesting to them, a lot of people are happy to spend, a half hour discussing something with you that's totally off what they usually do if it's something they're excited about. So don't go to them and be like, I need help because I don't know how to use this program and it's not working, and every time I try to press save, it just exits it. Tell them why you're doing it. Where is it going to get you? What is the project you're working on? Get them excited. Engineers are really excitable people. If they're interested in the technology you're working on, if they want to work towards your end goal, they will, whether or not they're getting paid for it. So I think it's important to kind of bring that bigger picture to them to kind of get them excited to do kind of volunteer work in the office.
I think tagging on to that, sharing appreciation when people go out of their way to help you, whether it's a sincere thank you or an email to bosses, or a lot of companies will have kind of internal recognition systems that you can use. I think people a lot of times are motivated by being told that they did a good job and by what they did mattered to you. So if you can be a person who recognizes when other people are doing kind of above and beyond and then reflect that back to them, I think that makes them incredibly willing to help you.
Yeah, I agree. I think, that kind of, that completing that feedback loop and actually appreciation is kind of I always say appreciation is a volunteer paycheck. So I think, appreciation can be used in a lot of ways. And I think Untitled chapters and leaders out there today can do a lot of that and really practice that skill. So it becomes natural when you get into the workplace. You're naturally doing that kind of stuff. I mean, I think like even tutoring other students, explaining complex concepts to others helps prepare you for customers. Because again, both of you have customer interfaces. You have to go out and talk to customers who may not understand engineering concepts, but have to explain them. Are there things that help prepare you to do that? Understand those customer needs and maybe explain those difficult concepts?
Yes, I can kind of talk to that. So I have a lot more, I guess, as I kind of went along, I got more and more interaction with customers, and there are kind of two distinct types of interactions I've had with customers. There are customers who really want to know why you chose to do the thing you're doing the way you're doing it, and they want you to explain it to them. And I think sometimes you'll get, PhDs who, if you say something wrong, they're going to come at you and be like, that's not how I would have done. And otherwise, you just need to have that skill of being able to translate, from a senior engineering course to like, how would you explain this to your freshman self? How do you take, this is what we're doing and explain it to someone who understands all the concepts, but maybe doesn't really care why you chose that brand of this or, that exact form factor of that, kind of extracting out the important bits again and making sure that you're giving them the information that they need rather than just like death by detail and not really being helpful. And there are others who are more interested in just, how is this going to help me? So not so much how are you going to do it, but what is it going to look like when it's done? And that's something where talking to other people, again, communication is important, because if you can talk to other people who have either done this before or kind of seen similar things, you can kind of give the customer a good picture of, if we make this change, here is what it's going to look like to your user. Here's what it's going to look like when it goes into production. Here's all of the effects that are going to happen. And it's going to be really cool. And being able to kind of have that conversation is really helpful.
One of the things that's been particularly helpful for me, in my previous role and in my current role, I'm designing new products. And I'm designing new products, and particularly the parts of the products in the operator station that people interact with a lot. But it can be really difficult to get feedback from customers that isn't just like, okay, yeah, I like it, or no, I don't like it. And so when I do customer interactions, the skill that I use the most is active listening. I don't necessarily want to hear what they think of this thing that I'm developing. I want them to talk about the stuff that really makes them angry. The stuff that frustrates them, the stuff like, gosh darn it, why does this take 3 button presses to do when I do it, 10 times a day? Can't you just make it easier? That's the stuff that is like so completely valuable for me, because if we can remove some of those little pain points for the customers, especially even the pain points that they don't even realize are pain points, that is where like I can drive value into our products. I keep thinking back to like when the iPhone was introduced, nobody wanted an iPhone. Nobody had any idea what the iPhone was. All the functionality that we have today, it was solving an unspoken need. And so when I think about customer interactions, I'm trying to think about how do I identify some of those unspoken needs and how do I innovate around those and really bring value?
I think it's great to talk about bringing value because, again, it's something, we don't think about when we're in school. How do we bring value? You're trying to pass the test, finish the project, graduate, get out to work. But again, really, it's all about delivering value, right? It's, again, back in your volunteer work or as a student, bringing value to maybe others and bringing value to your program. And then that's certainly a muscle you have to flex a lot in industry, right? You have to be able to bring the value. So I think, a lot of students have told me that, it was just so a proud moment when they got tapped on the shoulder and said, you've earned the other Captain. You made it. You're good enough. And it just brought that kind of confidence. And so then to have the opportunity to be able to bring value through your volunteer work and through your programs, I think it's really exciting. Any particular moment as a leader at EduCapanu that maybe did that for you?
For me, I think about the Student Leadership Conference. It was one that my chapter hosted. We started planning it when I was president, and we finished it up the year after. That was a really special moment for me, standing up kind of at the beginning of that in front of all of these people, my peers who were doing such exciting things around the entire nation, thinking about like the speakers that we had and being so excited for them to hear what some of these speakers were going to share. And then standing up in front of it and feeling like we'd accomplished something as a team. That was a really proud moment for me. And it was a learning opportunity and a leadership moment that I still carry with me today.
Yeah, I think the student leadership conferences were really great for just exposing yourself to a lot of people from different schools who may both learn, both have courses in different ways than you do, but also just maybe are studying something different, even though they're still within HKN. I remember there was one where we had a panel about I don't know if it was legal or if it was about standards, but it was something totally different from anything I'd ever experienced. But kind of having that exposure and being able to kind of have that in the back of my mind for later. So it wasn't something I necessarily would have ever thought to learn about or read about on my own. Just kind of having those experiences where you learn about something new and you don't know how it's going to apply right now. It's going to come back in 3-4 years. You're going to remember, I remember sitting in on that panel and I remember the woman saying this, and you get a lot more value out of these things once you're out of them than you realize when you're in them.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, Rebecca, because the one session I was thinking of was one on public policy and IEEE. Never would have thought about that outside of the context of a conference, but it was one of the most eye-opening sessions that I've ever attended.
That's one of the most popular sessions even today is public policy and IEEE. We work with say on that, and it's always a super popular session that we have during the SLC, which will happen again this fall. So at Kappa News, we'll look forward to that. We'll be having that again come October. So we're really excited to be able to do that and bring you programs like this Pathways program. Because I think that is the best part, right, is that we get to meet each other. And we're part of a global organization, both in IEEE and at Kappa Nu. There's other chapters that want to work with you in cooperation between them. And I know later today at 3 o'clock, you're hosting a networking session, Amy, right, on executive presence. That. So that's going to be on Spatial Chat. So please look forward to joining that. I know we're going to have a couple of other. There's themed and hosted networking sessions that follow this program at 3 and at 5, leveraging IEEE with Tom Coughlin, executive presence with Amy, and then innovation with teams with Kathy Ashi from Qualcomm. So some really great networking things coming up in this cool platform called Spatial Chat. So I hope you all can join us later and be there with Amy. And Rebecca, if you have time, you can jump in. We have other ones at 5 with John McDonald from GE on key decisions that impact your career, on goal setting with a gentleman from ABB, and resilience in communication. So a lot of things on communications because those things come up a lot. Learning to communicate clearly, precisely, make yourself understood. Important stuff, right? And they don't necessarily tell you that in engineering school, how important that is. I know I think you've got some great ideas that you want to share with people on what your self now would have told your younger self when you were starting your career. You have some great advice you want to share, and I guess a couple of slides that we have that you've put together.
Yeah, so I can kick it off. So one of the things, if I could go back and tell myself, particularly telling myself in college, going into my first internship, I was really nervous that I did not know what I was supposed to do. And what I would tell myself is, there's no class in college called How to Design a Bulldozer 101. So on some level, when you go into a new company or into a new job, particularly as a student, and as a manager now, I'm expecting that I have to teach you pretty much everything. So the things that you bring in when you're new is you bring in a new perspective, you bring in enthusiasm, you bring in a willingness to learn. And I wish I would have realized how valuable those skills are instead of being worried that somebody was going to ask me to do, a Fourier transform on my second day. That has not happened. No Fourier, no Laplace. So being able to really centralize the fact that knowing how to learn is a really important skill. And that's what I get out of an engineering degree is you get kind of the practice of learning some of the basic tools, but the application of those is really the piece that I don't think they teach you. I don't know if they can teach you. I don't know if there's a way to teach it without experiencing it for yourself. What about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, so I think that's spot on. I think that when you first start your job, there's also a period of, you come in with a job description. This is, kind of vaguely what you're going to be working on. But there's kind of an interview that happens in between you starting on your first day and you kind of starting to actually contribute fully, where you're kind of feeling out, this is me getting used to the systems, and they're kind of feeling out, she's really good at this. Maybe someone else could do this part, and kind of figuring out what your strengths are and kind of where you fit into the greater team. So I guess to the slide, there are no wrong turns. There's no one-size-fits-all career path. Try something new. Like Amy said, if you fail, it's not the end of the world, because, you were hired for a reason. There's something that you're good at. Maybe it's just not this one excursion that you went on in your career. And, and don't be afraid to speak up. It's important that, if you know that you know something, don't be afraid that you've only been here for, a year and you can't say anything about it yet. If you feel strongly about, a particular decision, or if they're just not considering something that you're like, why aren't we thinking about, the heat dissipation of this thing? Like, it's a small box. It's going to be, in a hot location. We might be working in Massachusetts, but when it gets to Arizona, it's not going to be the same. Make sure you say something, because a lot of times people are just so conditioned to, this is the way that we did it last time, so we're going to do it again this way, and maybe not taking those additional considerations that you could bring in. Definitely self-awareness, very important. If someone is like, do you agree with me? And you have no idea what they're talking about, just be like, I think I need more information. I don't know enough on the topic. No one is going to be like, well, why don't you? It's respectful to say when you don't know and that you need to do more research. It's not disrespectful to say, I am not experienced in the same topic that you are. And then, as I mentioned before, take good notes for the person who's going to fill your shoes. Make sure that if you feel like you're ready to take the next step, someone else can come in behind you. And mentorship is kind of a pay it forward thing as well. So make sure that, you're not leaving them dry when you go on to the next great opportunity. Have someone who you've been talking to, been kind of training up informally, and then they can have that next great experience, which is the one that you're now, moving on from. And kind of there's always that chain of kind of mentor the next person so that you can move up, and then they can also move up behind you. And then the last one is just your actions and your attitude become your personal brand. You don't determine your own personal brand. You can't be like, I am bright and sunshiny, and then come to work, and that's not how people see you. So make sure that, your actions reflect how you want to be seen. And that's something where, at school, your grade is really mostly based on what you turn into the professor. The professor could love you or hate you, but if you get a 30 on your exam, you're going, unless there's a curve. I know engineering, but chances are you're going to fail. And if you get constant A's, no matter how much the professor hates you, they have to give you that grade. But in the real world, make sure that you're respectful, make sure that you're kind to your fellow employees, because that's also going to have a big hand in kind of where you're going next, and, who will accept you back if you do, veer off a little bit and decide it's time to come home. So definitely
that's such
important.
A great point, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I think
character attitude, right? That's right. We say that at a company. It's about the three things, right? Not just your grades, but your character and your attitude. I think you said that so well.
I think that a lot of times we hear about the pie model for advancement. It means that when you advance, it's based on your performance, your image, and your exposure. And the only one of those things that you truly control is your performance. And in engineering school, as you said, Rebecca, you advance based on performance. But in an industry, it's a lot about your image, which is your attitude and how you hold yourself, and then your exposure, which is that piece of what a mentor can help you with. Who knows you, who gets to see the work that you're doing. So absolutely fantastic point there.
Well, this has been a great conversation today. Thanks both. I knew it would be. Both of you are awesome, and I'm so happy we had you, and thanks for sharing those insights. I want to remind people that you could have uploaded your resume to our resume bank, because a lot of our sponsors are looking for employees. So if you haven't, go back and do that. And then again, about our networking sessions, there in the resource tab, there's a link to Spatial Chat at 3 o'clock Eastern this afternoon. At 5 o'clock, we're having those live networking sessions. Like I said, Amy's going to lead one of those on executive presence. There's a bunch of other really great topics, so we hope you join us for additional Pathways sessions. Those are also marked, and to come and network with us. But thank you so much, Amy, and thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for sharing your insights and your information, and really being so open and helping others understand the challenges and the opportunities they're going to face as they leave engineering school and go out into their broader careers and in life. Thank you so much. Really grateful to both of you today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Nancy.